Christmas morning always carried a special kind of magic for me, even as the years passed and traditions shifted. I remember clutching a tin of homemade cookies, my hands trembling slightly not from the cold, but from anticipation. My son's house glowed with twinkling lights, laughter spilling out from behind the frosted windows. I told myself this year would be different, that maybe the awkwardness of the past would melt away in the warmth of family. I took a deep breath, straightened my scarf, and rang the bell, heart fluttering with hope. The door swung open, and there she was, my daughter-in-law, Emily. Her smile was tight, her eyes flickering over me as if I were an unexpected guest rather than family. "Oh, you made it," she said, her voice just a shade too bright. "We weren't sure you'd come after last year." I forced a smile, ignoring the sting in her words, and stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon wrapping around me. My son Mark appeared in the hallway, distracted, already pulled into the chaos of wrapping paper and children's shrieks. He gave me a quick hug, barely meeting my eyes. I tried to settle in, placing my cookies on the crowded kitchen counter, but I could feel the invisible wall between us. Emily's friends were there, her parents too, all chatting easily, moving around me as if I were a piece of furniture. I laughed at the right moments, offered to help, but every gesture seemed to land flat. Then, as I handed Emily a small gift, she leaned in, her lips barely moving. "You're lucky we even include you," she whispered, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "Pity goes a long way." My heart thudded in my chest. I tried to steady my breathing, to keep my face neutral, but her words echoed in my mind, sharp and cold. I had always suspected I was merely tolerated, but hearing it spoken aloud so casually, so cruelly, left me reeling. I glanced at Mark, hoping for a sign of support, but he was already lost in conversation, oblivious. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed, but what she said next would haunt me for months. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Christmas meant something entirely different, when the house was mine. And Mark was still my little boy, his eyes wide with excitement as he tore through wrapping paper, his laughter echoing through every room. I can still picture those mornings, the two of us in our pajamas, sipping cocoa by the fire, the tree twinkling in the corner. I'd spend weeks planning the perfect meal, stringing popcorn garlands, and hiding little surprises in his stocking. Back then, it felt like we were a team, just the two of us against the world. Even as Mark grew older, he never lost that childlike joy for the holidays. When he went off to college, he'd call me every December asking for my gingerbread recipe, or reminding me not to forget the cranberry sauce. He'd come home, arms full of laundry and stories, and we'd fall right back into our old rhythms. I cherished those moments, knowing they wouldn't last forever, but never imagining just how much things would change. The first Christmas after he met Emily was different, but I told myself it was just the excitement of new love. She was polite, even warm at first, eager to help in the kitchen and quick to compliment my decorations. I remember feeling hopeful, thinking maybe I'd gained a daughter, not just a daughter-in-law. But as the years passed, subtle shifts began to creep in. Mark started spending more holidays at Emily's parents' house, and when they did come to mine, it was always rushed, squeezed between other obligations. Emily's laughter grew louder, her opinions sharper, and I found myself shrinking, unsure of my place in their new world. I tried to adapt to be the easygoing mother-in-law who didn't make waves. I offered to host, to cook, to babysit when their children came along. Sometimes they accepted, but more often I was met with polite excuses or last-minute changes. The invitations dwindled, and when they did come, I felt like an afterthought, someone to be managed, not cherished. I'd watch Emily's family gather around the table, sharing inside jokes and stories, while I sat quietly at the edge, my contributions barely acknowledged. The contrast between then and now is stark. I went from being the center of Mark's world to a peripheral figure orbiting around his new family, careful not to overstep. I missed the days when he'd called just to chat, when he'd ask for my advice or share his worries. Now, our conversations are brief, practical, always interrupted by a child's cry or Emily's voice in the background. I tell myself it's just the way things go, that children grow up and start their own lives. But the ache of being left behind never really fades. What hurts most is the longing for connection or belonging, for even a small sign that I still matter. I replay old memories in my mind, clinging to the warmth of those early Christmases, hoping for a flicker of that closeness to return. But each year, the distance grows, and I find myself wondering if I'm asking for too much, if maybe I should just accept my new role as the outsider. Still, a part of me refuses to let go, to stop hoping that one day things might change. That's why I keep showing up year after year, holding on to the hope that this time I'll be seen not out of pity, but out of love. The morning unfolded. In a blur of activity, children darting between rooms, wrapping paper flying, the television humming with Christmas specials. I tried to find my place in the chaos, offering to help wherever I could. "Emily, can I set the table?" I asked, hoping to be useful. She barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, I've got it. The kids like to help me," she replied, her tone light but final. I nodded, stepping back, telling myself not to take it personally. I wandered into the living room, where Mark was assembling a toy train set with my grandson, Ethan. "Need a hand?" I offered, my voice bright. Mark smiled, but it was distracted, his attention fixed on the tiny screws and plastic tracks. "We're almost done, Mom. Maybe you can help with the batteries later." I perched on the edge of the couch, watching, them feeling the familiar ache of being on the outside looking in. Emily's mother, Linda, breezed in with a tray of pastries, her laughter filling the room. "You have to try these, everyone. Family recipe," she announced, passing the plate around. When it reached me, Emily's eyes flickered. "Oh, Mom, you know she's not really into sweets," she said, dismissing me with a wave. I opened my mouth to protest, but the moment passed. The conversation moved on without me. Throughout the day, the small slights accumulated like snowflakes, each one light, almost imperceptible, but together forming a heavy, suffocating blanket. When I tried to join a conversation about holiday plans, Emily steered it away, talking over me or redirecting questions to her own mother. When I offered to read a story to the kids, she smiled tightly. "They're a little wound up right now. Maybe later." Even my cookies, which I'd baked with such care, sat untouched on the counter, overshadowed by Linda's elaborate desserts. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that I was being too sensitive. After all, Emily was busy, the house was full, and it was easy to get lost in the shuffle. But every time I reached out, I felt the invisible barrier grow thicker. I watched as Emily and her mother shared knowing glances, as Mark laughed at jokes I didn't understand, as the children clung to their other grandmother's legs. I felt myself shrinking, my voice growing smaller with each passing hour. At lunch, I sat at the far end of the table, my plate barely touched. The conversation swirled around vacations I hadn't been invited to, inside jokes from gatherings I hadn't attended. I tried to chime in, to share a memory or a thought, but my words seemed to vanish into thin air. Linda leaned over, her hand on Emily's arm. "So nice to have everyone together," she said, her eyes sliding past me. Emily smiled, her lips curving into that same smirk I'd seen at the door. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe. As I stood by the sink, rinsing a plate, I heard voices drifting in from the hallway. Emily and Linda, their words low but unmistakable. "She just doesn't get it, Mom," Emily whispered. "She's so needy. I mean, we include her because Mark would feel guilty otherwise. Pity goes a long way." Linda chuckled softly. "Well, you're a saint for putting up with it. Not everyone would." My hands trembled as I set the plate down, the sting of their words settling deep in my chest. I pressed my palm to the cool countertop, willing myself not to cry. I kept telling myself it was all in my head until I overheard them in the kitchen, and suddenly everything I'd feared was laid bare. I returned to the living room, my heart pounding, cheeks flushed with humiliation. I tried to compose myself, smoothing my sweater and forcing a smile. But the words I'd overheard echoed in my mind, sharp and relentless. I told myself to hold it together, to not let anyone see how much it hurt. After all, it was Christmas. I didn't want to ruin the day for everyone else. The afternoon wore on, thick with the scent of roast and the sound of children's laughter. I busied myself with small tasks, collecting empty cups, straightening pillows, anything to keep my hands occupied and my mind distracted. But every time I caught Emily's eye, I saw that same glint of amusement, as if she knew exactly how I felt and relished it. As we gathered around the table for dinner, Mark raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, his voice warm, eyes shining with pride. Everyone echoed him, clinking glasses, laughter bubbling up around the table. I lifted my own glass, trying to join in, but the words caught in my throat. I looked at Mark, searching his face for any sign that he noticed my discomfort. But he was already turning to Emily, his hand resting on hers. The meal began, conversation flowing easily among the others. I tried to participate, asking Ethan about his new toys, complimenting Linda on her pie, but my efforts were met with polite nods and distracted smiles. I felt invisible, a ghost at my own family's table. Then, as the plates were being cleared, Emily stood up, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's all give a round of applause for my mother, who made this incredible meal," she announced, beaming at Linda. The room erupted in cheers, everyone praising Linda's cooking and hospitality. I clapped along, my smile brittle feeling. The sting of being overlooked. Suddenly, Emily turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating. "And of course, we're so glad you could join us too," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "You're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. The room fell silent. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died on lips. I felt every eye on me, the heat rising in my face. For a moment, no one moved. I looked at Mark, desperate for him to say something, to defend me, to do anything at all. But he just stared at his plate, his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my gaze. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the humiliation pressing down on me. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off, but my voice cracked, betraying me. "Well, I'm grateful to be here," I managed, my words barely audible. "No." One responded. The silence stretched, awkward and suffocating, until Linda finally cleared her throat and changed the subject. The conversation resumed, but the mood had shifted. I could feel the pity in their glances, the discomfort in their voices. I was no longer just an outsider. I was a spectacle, the object of everyone's embarrassment. I sat through the rest of the meal in a daze, barely tasting the food, my mind racing. I replayed Emily's words over and over, each repetition cutting deeper. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to belong, all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of family. I looked at Mark, my son, the boy I'd raised, with so much love, and wondered how he could sit there and let this happen. As dessert was served, I quietly excused myself, slipping away from the table and into the hallway. I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking, and stepped outside into the cold night air. The world was silent, the snow falling softly around me, muffling the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses inside. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, letting the tears finally fall. I never expected what would happen after I walked out that door. The cold air stung my cheeks as I stood on the porch, my breath coming in shaky bursts. I could hear muffled voices inside, the clatter of dishes, the forced laughter that always follows an uncomfortable moment. I wanted to run, to disappear into the night, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady myself, but the humiliation clung to me like a second skin. After a few minutes, the door creaked open. Mark stepped out, his face pale, eyes darting everywhere but mine. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost embarrassed. I searched his face for the boy I used to know, the one who would have wrapped his arms around me without hesitation. But all I saw was a man caught between loyalties, afraid to make a scene. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some air?" He hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. "Emily didn't mean it like that. She's just stressed. The holidays, you know." His words felt like a slap. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much it hurt, but I bit my tongue, of course. I said quietly, "I wouldn't want to cause any trouble." He nodded, relief flooding his face, and slipped back inside, leaving me alone once more. I wrapped my arms around myself, the ache in my chest growing heavier. I could hear voices through the door, Millie's sharp, insistent, Linda's soothing, the children's laughter rising and falling. I wondered if they were talking about me, if I'd become the villain in their story. A few minutes later, Linda appeared, her expression carefully neutral. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her tone gentle but distant. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She patted my arm, her touch light and perfunctory. "Emily gets overwhelmed sometimes. Don't take it personally." I wanted to ask her if she'd ever felt like an outsider in her own family, but the words wouldn't come. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The children sensed the tension, their play quieter, more subdued. Emily avoided my gaze, busying herself with dishes and leftovers. Mark hovered near the kitchen, glancing at me from time to time, but never coming close. Linda took charge, directing the cleanup, her voice brisk and efficient as I gathered my things. I heard whispers from the hallway, Molly complaining to Mark, her voice tight with frustration. "She's so sensitive. I can't say anything without her getting upset." Mark mumbled something in response, too quiet for me to hear. I felt the old wounds reopening, memories of other holidays where I'd been made to feel small, where my presence was more obligation than joy. But not everyone turned away. My grandson Ethan slipped his small hand into mine as I knelt to tie my shoes. "Grandma, are you sad?" he whispered, his eyes wide and earnest. I blinked back tears, squeezing his hand gently. "No, sweetheart, just a little tired." He hugged me tightly, his arms warm and forgiving, and for a moment, the ache in my heart softened. As I prepared to leave, Emily's father approached, his voice quiet. "I hope you have a safe drive home," he said, his eyes kind. "It was good to see you." I managed a grateful smile, clinging to his simple decency. Not everyone in that house saw me as a burden, but as I stepped out into the night, the weight of the day pressed down on me. I replayed every word, every glance, every moment I'd been made to feel less than. I wondered if I'd ever truly belong, or if I was destined to be the outsider, the one who was included out of pity, not love. The drive home was a blur, my mind swirling with regret and longing, old hurts resurfacing with every mile. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew something inside me had changed. That night, I sat alone in my quiet house, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. The Christmas lights I'd strung weeks ago blinked softly in the window, casting gentle colors across the empty living room. I stared at the untouched plate of cookies I'd brought home, the ones no one had wanted, and felt the familiar ache of disappointment settle in my chest. But beneath this sadness, something else began to stir, a slow, simmering anger, not just at Emily, but at myself for letting this pattern continue for so long. I thought back over the years, replaying every slight, every moment I'd been pushed aside or made to feel invisible. I realized how much I'd bent over backward, how many times I'd swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. I'd convinced myself that if I tried hard enough, if I was patient and accommodating, things would eventually get better. But all it had done was teach them that my feelings didn't matter, that I would accept whatever scraps of kindness they offered. The truth was, I deserved more than pity. I deserved respect, and I deserved to be treated as family, not as an obligation. I thought of Mark, of the boy who used to run to me with open arms, and wondered when he'd stop seeing me as someone worth fighting for. I wondered when I'd stop seeing myself that way. As the hours passed, my resolve hardened. I couldn't change Emily or Linda or even Mark, not if they didn't want to change. But I could change how I responded. I could stop showing up just to be humiliated. I could stop letting their indifference define my worth. I could set boundaries, even if it meant breaking old traditions and risking their disapproval. The idea scared me, but it also felt strangely liberating. I imagined what it would be like to spend next Christmas on my own terms, maybe with friends who valued me, or volunteering somewhere I was needed, or even just treating myself to a quiet day filled with things I loved. I didn't have to keep chasing after a family that didn't want me. I could choose myself for once. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be awkward conversations, maybe even anger or guilt. But I was tired of shrinking to fit into a space that was never really Mine. I was tired of waiting for someone else to give me permission to belong. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I knew I had to do something drastic, something that would change everything. Next Christmas, for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a holiday where I was happy, not just included. And that hope, fragile as it was, felt like the greatest gift I could give myself. The weeks after Christmas were filled with restless nights and long searching walks. I rehearsed conversations in my head, my heart pounding with both fear and determination. I knew I couldn't let another year go by pretending everything was fine. So one chilly afternoon in January, I picked up the phone and called Mark. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied myself. Remembering the promise I'd made to honor my own worth, "Mark, I need to talk to you about Christmas." I began my words careful but firm. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that used to make me back down. But this time, I waited. "I know things have changed since you got married, and I respect that you have your own family now. But I can't keep coming to gatherings where I feel unwelcome and disrespected. I love you, but I need to take care of myself, too." He was quiet, and I could hear the confusion and hurt in his voice. "Mom, I didn't realize you felt that way. Emily, she can be blunt, but she doesn't mean to hurt you." I took a deep breath, choosing my words with care. "Intentions matter, but so do actions. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm just letting you know that next year I'll be spending Christmas differently. I hope you understand." The conversation was uncomfortable, and I could feel the distance between us, but I also sensed a shift. Mark didn't argue or try to guilt me. He just listened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt heard. Word spread quickly through the family. Emily sent a terse text. "Sorry if you felt left out, but I didn't reply." Linda called, her voice laced with concern and a hint of judgment. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked. I answered honestly, "Yes, I need to do what's right for me." Some relatives were supportive, others distant, but I stood my ground, even when it hurt. As the months passed, I found unexpected comfort in new places. A neighbor invited me to her book club, and I accepted, finding laughter and warmth among women who welcomed me without reservation. I volunteered at the local shelter, serving meals and sharing stories with people who saw me, not as an obligation, but as a friend. I even reconnected with an old friend from work, and we made plans to spend the next holiday together, just the two of us. No expectations or hidden resentments. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when I missed the idea of family more than the reality. But each time I doubted myself, I remembered the pain of that Christmas and the strength it took to walk away. I realized that setting boundaries wasn't about shutting people out. It was about making space for the love and respect I deserved. Some relationships shifted, others faded, but I found a new sense of peace in the life I was building for myself. I was no longer waiting for an invitation to belong. I had finally given that gift to myself. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the words Emily said or the silence that followed. It was the years I spent believing I had to accept whatever scraps of affection were offered just to keep a place at the table. I let myself become small, thinking that was the price of family, that if I was patient and forgiving enough, things would change. But what I've learned is that self-respect isn't selfish. It's the foundation for every healthy relationship, including the one you have with yourself. Family isn't just about blood or tradition. It's about being seen, valued, and loved for who you are, not out of pity, but out of genuine care. I wish I'd understood sooner that it's okay to walk away from situations that hurt, even if it means breaking old patterns or disappointing people who never truly saw me. Setting boundaries was terrifying, but it was also the most empowering thing I've ever done, Kay. It taught me that I am worthy of kindness and that I don't have to beg for a seat at anyone's table. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether you're asking for too much just by wanting to be included, I want you to know you're not alone, and you don't have to accept it. There is life, love, and belonging beyond the places that make you feel small. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it means letting go of what you thought family should be. And if you think this is where my story ends, you're wrong. Still learning, still growing, and still finding new ways to fill my life with meaning and connection. The next chapter is mine to write, and so is yours.